Hey, we're live.
Okay, so let's call to order the August 21st, 2023 meeting of the Lake Stevens Planning Commission. We'll do the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now we'll do the roll call. Commissioner Davis, Jennifer Davis,
Present.
Commissioner Connor Davis,
Present.
Commissioner Holt,
Here.
Commissioner Morton,
Here.
Commissioner Packard,
Here.
Commissioner Huxford,
Yeah.
all present. So let's move on to item 3, guest business. Is there any guest business this evening? Do we have anybody in the chat?
Nico and Christy Schmidt, Nico Foz and planning manager, Christy Schmidt. And there's someone named Zerby.
Okay. Let's then move on to action item number 4. Item A, minutes of August 7th, 2023. Has everybody had a chance to review those, and is there any edits or comments?
I move that we. Was it pass or what is it?
Approve the minutes.
Approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye. Minutes of August 7th are approved. On to item 4B, the minutes for June 26, 2023. Has everybody had a chance to review those? Any comments or questions? Do I hear?
Yes, and I will approve to forward those as written as well.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that is approved. Item 5A, discussion items, code cleanup, Director Wright.
Okay, thank you, Commission. First of all, I'll point out to you that you all have a hard copy of materials in front of you tonight. So when we posted the packet and converted to PDF, all of the strike through changes weren't shown. So as we walk through the changes, and we'll be a little bit more deliberate tonight as we walk through those to make sure that everybody has a clear understanding of the changes, but that's what's in front of you with the paper copy are the changes. So with that, we had introduced our code cleanup project to you a couple of months ago and had to put it on hiatus, but we're back now and hoping to move through that. We had created a matrix that showed different levels of changes, and I'm going to have Assistant Planner Faz kind of talk to you about the matrix and the different parts of it, and then I will walk you through the proposed changes.
Hey, this is Planner Nico Foz. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, awesome. So as Russ stated, we have a matrix. It's split into 3 phases, as it always has been. It's a housekeeping, update, and substantial. So the first portion largely consisting of easy fixes, grammar, deletion, fixing references. Next is updates with any sort of administrative determinations, internal or updating to adhere to any sort of external regulation updates. And the final is substantial. We're presenting the strikeout language that we have in all phases at this point in the project. Phase 1, we started with a full overview of the project at our first Planning Commission presentation. And then in May, we also came and provided strike-through language for Phase 1, the housekeeping. So again, just continuing this project further by providing a full scope of strike-through language on code that we've rewritten at this point.
And I'll just add that some of these sections that you have some crossover. So we have reorganized a little bit from the last version you've seen, and a column has been added that shows sort of just to keep us honest where we're at in the project. So the last column, if it says done, pending, et cetera, just as a check-in on where we are to make sure that we are going through that in this list of items.
Exactly.
Nico, anything else you wanted to add?
Just kind of highlighting things that have changed since then. Legal lot status determination, we had a update from the city attorney on that one. updated some, sorry, had some more direction from the city on sign regulations. So those have been updated as well. And then accessory dwelling units and duplexes, House Bill 1337 has beefed up our substantial section of our code update, just bringing us into compliance with statewide regulations that were passed this past legislative session. So.
Okay, with that, I will get going with the changes. So the first page of your strike through would be equivalent to page 10 of your packet for point of reference. So section 1, again, we did look at those before. Those are the definitions, and we've added we've modified the definition for accessory dwelling unit to be consistent with new changes in state legislation. We've made a distinction between attached accessory dwelling units and detached accessory dwelling units, added a definition for adult family home, and have added a definition for principal unit. And again, that would come out of the accessory dwelling unit regulations. A non-substantive change has been made to fire marshal as we go through looking for gender neutrality. And then the planned residential development has been updated to be consistent with the code requirements. As we go to design review, the first thing we needed to do is, since we don't accept physical copies, we just wanted to make sure that that was updated, and just saying that we need the one electronic copy of our materials. In the first review, we had talked about that there were 2 sections of identical code for home occupation. So that eliminates one of those, the other is retained. As we get into section 4, sure.
Is the retained section of home occupations somewhere? Or is it, I've got to look that up.
The reference might be in there, but there are no changes.
Okay.
So really not showing the code section itself, just the action that we
I'll just have to look that up.
don't want 2 redundant sections.
Yeah.
Okay. Correct.
Similar. Is it actually?
It's, I don't remember if it's 100% the same, but it is nearly identical, if not entirely identical.
Russ, do you want me to provide some clarification on the reference for that one?
Be great.
So 1444-015 home occupation was updated in 2021 for ordinance 1124. Jill Needham was the one who led that. It did add some language and provide some clarity. So that is the section we are keeping. I think there might have been some cross wires on that. But 1444-015 is the one we're going to keep. And then there's a nearly identical section that was, I believe it was last updated in 2014. So that one was kind of abandoned by the 2021 update. It just wasn't stricken at that point. So just going through and cleaning it up.
Yep.
Okay, as we get into section 4, subdivisions, several changes, ranging from, again, making some changes for gender neutrality. And then as we move forward, talking about approval of final plats, what that looks like, and the types of, again, copies we need. Instead of calling out specific electronic file types, we've just made that more general. So as technology changes and saving conventions change, we don't have to go in and update our code for consistency. There are some more substantive changes as well as you get down to looking at alterations of subdivisions. So the process that had been in there made distinctions between when you altered a subdivision, if it was prior to recording, prior to decision, after recording, et cetera. And I went back and I looked at state law to see what these divisions were. And so sections D, E, and F that are shown as stricken really don't show up in state law. And so really tried, because that always is a question we have when people come in, how do I alter a subdivision? Because we have an administrative modification chapter, we have a subdivision alteration. So there were some crossovers and a lot of confusion on what we need to administer. So again, it was simplest to go back to sort of the clear distinction of what's in the state law, chapter 5817 of the revised code of Washington, and then look at our other existing administrative codes and recraft those regulations to be in parallel with those. So that's what we've done with the new sections A1 and 2, and then moving forward to section B1 and 2 also. So it just streamlines the code and gets rid of some redundancies and gray areas.
Russ, if I may, and
Yes.
whoever had the bet on I wouldn't speak tonight loses because I just spoke, so I don't know which one of you I have to pay off. There is we've asked this before, but I just want to make sure that it's somewhere prior to the planning director or designee. We have had this conversation in who that designee might be. Is that clearly identified somewhere else?
Yes. And the designee is typically going to be a senior planner, the planning manager, or the principal planner would be the first two. They would typically have that role in my absence.
Okay. Is that stated somewhere or is that just?
No, that's an administrative
Administrative
task that I
process.
can
Okay,
assign that role, but I'm just sharing with you who typically would be assigned that role.
perfect. Okay. All right. And again, I just was clarifying that because I know that
Yep.
it's been discussed before. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, then moving on to section 5, there's a scrivener there. It says sub areas again. That should be dimensional regulations. And it just corrected a cardinal direction from southeast to northeast. Then as we move into boundary line adjustment, the section header that had been codified was incorrect. It should be in the 1418s, not 1438. Again, we had a redundant section of code with temporary public structures. So we've just stricken one. And if Nico, if you have the reference of the other temporary public structure, you could share that with the group.
I'm looking for it right now. It is. Apologies. 1444.048 is the one that I'm seeing.
That was the one that we're removing.
Oh, 1416C110 inside of temporary use.
Okay.
That was updated in 2018.
And yeah, that section deals with all sorts of different temporary type issues, so it would be more appropriate located there. The next thing we did, moving on to screening and trees, there were a couple of older zoning descriptions that hadn't gotten cleaned up when we made those zoning code updates. So those have been corrected to reflect the current zone and remove the exception because the exception is redundant. If they have to meet the standards of those lots, then the exception would be met already. We've already talked about section 9, gender neutrality. This is just a deeper dive where we went into chapters 4 and 14 that my team has responsibility for and went through and cleaned up that language as appropriate. Let's see, did I get
Does there need to be an S in fines? On 141463, 115 variances. It looks like it was out, in, out, in. If they find that.
We will take a look at that.
And thank you for recognizing that not all builders are male.
Yes.
Feel so validated.
The S is stricken.
Okay,
if they find
okay, I can see.
just as hard to.
Okay,
to
got
tell.
it, got it, got it.
And then through the rest of that page, again, that is just updating language for neutrality. The same as we get into talking about non-conforming signs, satellite parking. So the next big changes would appear, and this gets down into the substantial changes, legal lot status determination. So the planning commission worked on this code project maybe 3 years ago to create a mechanism to do lot status determinations. Since then, we've found out a couple of things and working with our city attorney and going through the process. A big one is common ownership. So we've found in some cases that there might be very small fragmented tracts or described property that has been described for purpose of easement or other common feature that then they are now trying to seg off as distinct properties when it's just a sliver or something else. So with our city attorney, working with our city attorney, he suggested we put in some language in here that's actually fairly common in some other codes, that there is just a combination statute. So if you've owned joint property, you've used it jointly, it's considered a combined property. So that's where that comes from. The other change in this section would be section 3, where we talk about an alternative determination of lot status. So the first section I says the parcel meets the zoning regulations in effect at the time the lot was created. We have found that this becomes an impossible thing for people to show. That if you're going back to the early 1900s, there were not codified zoning codes. And as we went through this process, we talked about that really zoning codes didn't really evolve till after the 60s in generally their current format, and they continue to evolve. So when you put that requirement in front of people, it's just impossible. And we always by default then have to follow through with 3.2. And then the rest of that section is very easy to implement, but we've just found that the original 3I, it's just becomes unnecessary. Moving down to section 11.
Russ, may I?
Absolutely.
If there is any way that you could have 3, if a non-conforming lot has been blah, 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 written by someone other than an attorney. Sorry to our attorney in the room. That reads in a circle to me. And I understand where it's trying to go, but that gets, everything else is so matter of fact. And that red line seems unduly complicated.
Okay, I will work with our city attorney to see if we can simplify this a little bit.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to section 11 now, dimensional standards. So in one of our previous code date updates, the setbacks for accessory structures had been modified, and there was a section that was unintentionally omitted. We had always intended to allow accessory structures by something like a shed, something like that, to be closer to a property line than maybe the 5 or the 15 feet in rear yards and side yards. So this just places it back that accessory structures such as a shed can be within 5 feet of a property line.
So shed would be not, no foundation? What would constitute a shed? I'm sorry,
A shed is just any small building. It's not defined by the type of foundation. Obviously the foundation makes it more permanent if it's a poured foundation, but most sheds, you're right, are movable with some sort of a wood foundation. But I do want to circle back and look at the building code as I think about this, just to make sure that when we say accessory structure, we really mean shed with the changes that you'll see for accessory dwelling units. So I do want to go back and make sure there's a clear distinction of what we're talking about here. Sheds, garages, things like that. Also, as we look at our dimensional standards, couple of updates to the footnotes. So there is the table 1448I. And the first footnote we would look at is footnote 3. So when we updated our standards, all of these lot sizes had been based on mathematical calculations. So we have a gross lot, which is the entire lot and everything. Then we have a net area. And so that's what this was built on, are the net lot sizes. And so as you see for attached units in the R812 zone, 2800 becomes a proxy for the mathematical density calculation. And we just wanted to be very clear that that's the purpose of the 2800 square feet, because when you're developing townhomes or other things like that, you're not going to have very neat 16-foot wide lots. Then you'd be talking about a lot that's 120 feet deep, which is obviously impractical for a townhome that you're trying to encourage density. So we just wanted to make it abundantly clear that 2800 was a stand-in to get you to your net density, not as the actual lot size to be constructed. The next one was a little bit painful. Again, when we had updated the zoning code a few years ago, we knew as we had to deal with infill development, we needed to deal with the impervious surface allowances to make those practical, as well as be consistent with the stormwater manual. By the time that the recommendation had reached the city council, they were also sort of struggling with this footnote. Everybody's in agreement that we wanted to sort of set a bright line. Unfortunately, with some recommended changes, tweaks, the footnote 6 has been really hard to implement and created a lot of confusion about who's entitled to what does cumulative effect mean. So we are proposing to replace it with a much more lengthy footnote to try to be abundantly clear what these bright lines are for development standards and which projects would apply to this lesser impervious surface area. And if they wanted to increase it, what does that mean? And it generally means that it's as a subdivision is developed or an apartment complex or another large development, it's the entire project that's affected, and it's not necessarily on a lot by lot basis. So they would need to show no cumulative impact to the entire development, not just their one sliver of that development.
And this, of course, is not just for subdivisions and new development. This is for infill with existing properties.
The
Wanting
infill would be able to go up to the current maximum if they are doing their stormwater report, et cetera. This is really looking backwards to newly subdivided lots is going to be the most common. Otherwise, you would fall under your basic impervious allotment.
Okay, I'm kind of going back to ADUs in my mind and thinking that if there is somebody that is not a developer that's wanting to do some development on their single family
acre,
lot,
half acre lot. Yeah.
right? And those ratios are there's wording in here that they can make a case for, where did I just flip it? Again, clarity is key. And this has been one of those that the ball has shifted many, many times in this discussion.
And it will continue to.
And will continue to. But what can I plan on doing as a homeowner with property that I own that I want to build on?
Yep. So 6 really is going to be solely looking at newer subdivided properties prior to 2020 when these regulations were adopted. So if you'd had a subdivision and it was built under the 2014 Stormwater Drainage Management Manual, you were allotted X amount of stormwater. And so it's really then you have, say, a 5,000 square foot lot and you want to re-subdivide. And we would look at that. We would actually give the recommendation, well, you need to go back to your original subdivision. How is your stormwater vault detention facility sized? Is there room for you to add on to your home? That's different than the basic maximum impervious area column that goes for each zoning district. So in the case of, I have a half-acre lot and I want to subdivide it, or I want to add an accessory dwelling unit or something else like that, you can do that and you would follow the maximum impervious at the time of your development and the stormwater requirements at the time of your development. So in that case, you're looking forward, not backwards.
Okay. That's going to be interesting to clarify.
Clarification.
Sure.
ADU shall not be smaller than 250 square feet of gross floor area. So just trying to, imagine somebody has a two-car carport and then an ADU that is really just a small one bedroom ADU that might be a good size studio or one bedroom ADU might be 200 square feet. That they would, so they have to build at least a 250 square foot ADU.
Yeah, that would be coming out of the building code to make a habitable structure.
So the carport isn't the ADU, the carport garage, that is all separate square footage from the ADU itself.
Right, those could potentially be converted into ADUs, if appropriate, but
Because I think of a small ADU garage apartment that I rented, that thing had been, this is in St. Pete, Florida, granted, these were built in the 1920s, 1930s. But that thing was kind of close to 250, I think maybe 150 square feet.
Right.
Okay.
Again, that flies in face of impervious surface. So that's why I was asking the question, if there's that balance of what you can build. What that doesn't conflict, it mirrors what they're saying for the square footage of the building, but then it falls flat when you come to the ratios of impervious surface. So you see where that can be. You can get hung up on that.
Right.
Yeah.
so a little bit more work we need to do on signs for temporary non-commercial signs. These are just some first looks at it, but that needs, I don't want to really talk about those. That needs a little bit more an in-depth look. There has been a recommendation to do 30 days for temporary signs when you can remove them. 10 days is kind of hard to meet in some cases. Then we need to take a look at subdivision signs, and I haven't looked at what those look like compared to other jurisdictions yet and what's common. So we'll circle back on most of the information in 12 at the next meeting. And then just wanting to add some more language to our temporary uses to describe a lot of the times in new subdivisions, one of the houses will be converted to kind of a model home, or they'll have a temporary job shack. And so I just wanted to provide more clarity when that has to be removed. And then as we move into accessory dwelling units, that's really where the biggest changes are going to happen. So big changes to state law this last year, where now we are required to allow 2 accessory dwelling units per lot. The biggest caveat will be they still have to follow, to Commissioner Huxford's comment, all of the other requirements that you would impose on a single family lot. So if there's an impervious surface, they have to follow that impervious surface requirement. If there's a setback standard, they have to follow that. So they can't deviate from those other requirements, but if they have room to be constructed and can meet those other requirements, they can do that. And so as you go through some of the language we've stricken, like number 6, the reference to state law isn't the same anymore, and that standard has changed anyway with 20,000 square feet. And really it's irrelevant because we know that we double that and it just has to be done. Development standards. We again got rid of the only one per lot standard. The new state law would say they can be a minimum or a maximum of 1,000 square feet. So that's a change from 800 to 1,000 square feet.
But parking and everything is still, as put earlier, that you still have all of that requirement. You have all of the other requirements that they're having to fall back on.
Yes,
Okay.
parking, let's actually, next big change is number 6. Individual ADUs can be separated as a condominium. So that's new. So you could have an ADU on your lot. You would own the lot jointly with the parent structure, and you could sell the ADU as a condominium as a fee simple property. So that would be new in state law. In our own municipal code. The process to convey that is through a binding site plan. So that's what the tool they would use to create that cutout. Parking, well, impact fees becomes the next thing to look at. The new state law says that your impact fee can't be more than 50% of your standard single family impact fee. We had had a similar calculation before where we were charging them an apartment type unit, but we'll make that change to be consistent with state law and that sort of methodology. Parking becomes more complicated. So for an ADU on a lot that is smaller than 6,000 square feet, the city can now only require one parking space, which is actually consistent with what we're doing. So if it's larger than 6,000 square feet, you could require 2 spaces. If you look at an ADU where it's in distance to a major transit stop, then we couldn't have any parking. Under the last round of legislation, Lake Stevens doesn't qualify as having any major transit stops as defined in that RCW, which means we would fall back on 1 and 2 to look at parking requirements. And the other thing we will do when we get additional guidance from Commerce is we can apply to have a parking waiver in its entirety and just follow our municipal code if we can show just cause for engineering reasons, road safety, road connections, lack of sidewalks, lack of bus stops, whatever that is. So we will go through that process in the future. And then the last thing, sure.
With regard to parking, so not even the Lake Stevens Transit Center qualifies as a major transit stop.
Right.
Okay.
And that's due to the frequency of buses, and that would have been categorized as
Okay. So when more
Defines-
buses show up there, then
Right.
that could change.
could be expanded.
Okay.
Russ, I'm sure we don't have this probably that when I look at the 2 off-screen parking spaces per ADU required on lots 6,000 square feet of one. Can you give me an idea of what percentage lots and things are more than 6,000 square feet?
Probably 60% of our lots are larger than that.
2/3. Yeah. That just to me seemed very restrictive. Like that's going to be a barrier. They have a lot of ways for, even ADUs. Most ADUs are going to be 1 bedroom.
Yeah.
Units as well. So you just revisit that requirement. I would, that is a pretty considerable area. And it's a 6,000 square foot lot, you're likely not going to have an EDU. But yeah, I look at the cost benefit for someone who's considering putting in an ADU, and then the additional, like, pretty considerable additional concrete pad that likely would then go over plumbing and electric, and
Sure.
there'll be ones that screw around with that. So yeah, that feels pretty restrictive.
Okay.
To like additional space.
And just with that section, we were really just trying to mirror the new changes in state law. The planning commission could definitely be more restrictive if you wanted to and limit it to one space per ADU, and that's something we can probably have more conversation on.
I actually respectfully disagree. And I just think that parking has been such a major issue with what's already existing in some of these situations around the city, that if you are building ADUs and then not, setting aside certain areas for their parking, it's just going to be a bigger issue to the people that are surrounding that existing property. So I can see it both ways, but that's a difficult one. 'Cause if you build next to me and your people have a party and I can't get in my driveway,
Well, that's gonna be some.
Then we have to chat.
Spaces. matter.
right. No, but
Yeah.
one bedroom
Perhaps it's.
shared with two people with two cars because we don't have mass transit. They at least have to get to the transit center. I'm spitballing here, but that's, I would look at that a little bit closer. But I appreciate your comments.
I'll do a little bit more research though and provide some alternative language as we get closer to a public hearing.
Yeah.
Okay, and really the last change of note, it's very similar to the proposed ADU changes against changes in state law would now not allow us to have minimum lot sizes for duplexes. So right now we look at 125% of the underlying lot. Now, by right, a duplex could be on any lot if it otherwise meets dimensional standards, including parking and setbacks, et cetera.
Question about the-
Certainly.
Subsection that says the provisions of this.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, so it's just emphasizing that we can still have local zoning controls. And if there is a lot and let's say a half-acre lot and 3/4 of that is in critical areas, we don't have to allow an ADU on that lot by right. They can't come in and establish adding an ADU as a reasonable use. We would just say it has critical areas, those need to be protected, and you can't add another unit that will increase your footprint at least. So they could potentially go up, but they wouldn't necessarily be entitled to have 2 units if one was detached and had impacts. Okay. Yep.
That makes sense, but we use that.
Okay, so we can clarify. Okay, that was a lot of information. We will be coming back to you with another briefing to go over the remaining items for the matrix. We've had some discussion throughout the conversation. Are there any additional comments that the Planning Commission would like to make tonight on these proposed changes and clarifications?
So I just had one suggestion. When we're eliminating sections, would it make sense just to put like a little stub to reference what the new and correct location would be?
Yep. I
Because
made a note
sometimes
myself
it's
to do that.
several areas
Yep.
removed, yeah. Other questions or feedback from the commission? No? Thank you, Director Wright.
Okay, thank you.
And with that, we'll move on to item 6, Commissioner's Report. This is our chance to talk about matters relating to the work of the Planning Commission. And we'll start on the end of Commissioner Huxford.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I have nothing to report tonight. You're welcome, Jenny. You're welcome.
Commissioner Holt?
Generally have nothing to report except for, I would just, I don't know if I should even say it during the meeting. My mother-in-law, Virginia, who I take care of, has skin cancer. So I'm hoping Wednesday we're going to do a large area, so there is that we can get it. She's 94 years old, and I'm just really hoping we can get it under control and not.
Thank you. Commissioner Davis?
It just wanted to put a plug in for the upcoming Rotary annual Rotary fundraiser, the Quotes and Kegs event we held at the Creator Zone on November the 4th. It's always, this is an event last year, we raised close to $40,000 to go directly to scholarships for Lake Stevens high school students, several of which are students that I've had in my classroom for the past years. So really encourage the community to get out, support that event. November the 4th is Saturday at the Creator Zone over in West Lake Stevens.
Thank you. Commissioner Packard?
Nothing today.
Commissioner Davis?
Nothing for me.
Nothing from me. Commissioner Morton?
Nothing from me either.
Okay,
Oh, can I ask a question though? Are we having a meeting on September 6th and on September 20th,
4.
September 24th? No, September 6th.
Clerk Kinrich will talk about that in a second.
All right.
and that brings us on to item 7, Planning Director's Report.
Okay, I don't have any reports tonight. Well, I can say that we did hold the open house for the 91st project that you had seen the sneak preview of. We had about 10 people attend that, so went through, had some really great feedback, especially from the people that live in that Frontier Heights neighborhood. So we had more comments about the northern section than we did the southern section, the open house at least. So,
Interesting.
and happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Can I take it by your comments this evening that we received the exemptions that you were hoping to receive from Olympia? As a city, that there were some, you were going to make a case for Lake Stevens to be exempted from some of this.
I will when the guidance becomes
Okay,
available.
so that is still pending,
Yes,
but some of the comments that you made this evening are not
Yes.
part of that request.
correct.
Okay.
Any other items for discussion?
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us on to item 8, adjournment. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
All those in favor? So moved.
Thank you. But our next meeting is September 6th.
Next meeting, let me think.